Very cool.
I understand you just celebrated a birthday, March 10th.
I did, yeah. Yeah.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, man.
It's good to still be around.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Now you live in Durham right now?
I live in Raleigh.
You live in Raleigh.
Yeah.
You lived in Durham at one point, though, didn't
I
you?
lived in Durham for a while. I lived in Carborough, Chapel Hill. I was in Greensboro for 9 years. And at that point in my life, that was the longest I lived in one area. I'm from Chicago area, but we moved around every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And then there was a short period where I was in Dallas, Texas for a couple years, and in Auburn, Maine. So Greensboro, I spent a significant part of my life here, and it was from my junior year of high school until I was about 25 years old. The coming of age years, as they say.
Tell me about your time in growing up in Chicago. What was that like?
Well, I mean, it was mostly the suburbs. I don't remember much about the first 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was born at Edgewater Hospital on the north side. My parents were actually from the south side.
Mm-hmm.
My grandparents lived on Lakeshore Drive, what was called the Gold Coast, or it still is, right on the Lake Michigan, 25th floor apartment. Yeah.
Wow. And then you went from there to Maine? Or was it
The
Texas?
second time we ended up in the Chicago suburbs, we went from Deerfield, Illinois, which is right next to Highland Park, and we went to Maine, Auburn, Maine. And then we left there and ended up in Greensboro. I was like 16 years old.
Tell me about your early impressions of Greensboro. What year was that that you ended up here?
I think we rolled into Greensboro around 1973. And one thing I remember, because I think we came in, we drove in the evening. And I remember we were driving down Elm Street, and there wasn't much going on in downtown Greensboro back then. I mean, there were a lot of, as I recall, there were a lot of buildings that were shuttered,
Yeah, well, that was right at when the Cone Mills was moving out. And,
yeah, so it was pretty quiet.
Yeah, we were pretty much relying on textiles and everything.
Yeah,
that sort of fueled the economy here.
I mean, now it's like, where am I? I don't even recognize Greensboro. We lived over in Green Valley, which is not far from Friendly Shopping Center,
mm-hmm.
and that whole area is exploded now. I remember when Hobbs Road, I think it like bordered the woods. There was a place we used to ride. I had a motorcycle. It was called the Honda Pits, and I don't even know if that still exists. It's probably been swallowed up by development.
Oh yeah, most likely. And there used to be where Friendly Center is now. There used to be a golf course out there behind the whatever you call it, the Barnes and Noble. There used to be a golf course.
I remember that.
There's a field there, but there used to be a golf course there.
Yeah. No, it's Greensboro's. I mean, like Raleigh too. It's gotten a lot bigger.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in Greensboro?
It's just it's spread out quite a bit, and there's just more. There's more places to go, I think. Although I don't know. Sometimes quantity doesn't translate to quality.
Right.
Like I don't know. I don't have my finger on the pulse of what's going on in Greensboro now. I can tell you that back, in the mid to late '70s, Tate Street seemed amazing to me at the time. There was so much art, music, free spirits. I mean, there's a lot of people that I met when I got here. I met people that were older than me, anywhere from 3 to 10 years older than me, and it doesn't make a difference once you get to our age. But when you're an 18-year-old kid and you meet musicians or writers or painters and they're 7 or 8 years older than you, it's kind of cool. And,
Yeah, it's like they're larger than life, really.
yeah, yeah. So I actually am very. I'm glad that I had the experience of being here during that period because I think it was kind of a special time. And I still think Greensboro. There's something about the creative scene here that I think is actually better than Raleigh. I don't. I don't mind saying that on camera.
Well, why do you say that?
I don't know. It's just it's funkier.
Funkier.
In a good way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Anything in particular you see, or any artists you can pick out that you're just like, ooh, that right there, that's funky.
Yeah, I don't have my finger on the pulse of what's going on around here now, but I grew up, knowing. I mean, I had some friends that were true originals. Billy Ransom Hobbs. Let's see, Dakota Joe, Bruce. Um, um, when I moved here, I was a junior in high school, and early on, I met Heath Chappell. His father, was Fred Chappell, and so I remember going to the Pickwick when I was old enough to go in there, and Fred would be in there at the bar, and there'd be people sitting around, listening to him, to whoever he was talking with. I think sometimes it was Robert Watson, who was another professor of English at UNCG.
So tell me about what was the Pickwick?
The Pickwick is a bar. Now it's called Walker's, I think, and it's on Walker Avenue, right near the corner of Elam and Walker, which is back then was kind of a cool spot, and now there's there's a grocery store. I think it's called the Buy Right, and there's the laundromat that has a bar. Suds and Duds. I don't know if that's still there or not. Wahoo's was another bar. There's a burger place on the other corner, and then there's Fishbones. Back then, there wasn't quite as much stuff there, but it was still a spot. Mm-hmm. What's that neighborhood called? Lindley Park, maybe? I think it's Lindley Park. So there was, there's been stuff happening around there for a long time, I guess. The original Blind Tiger was there. Now I'm not sure what that building is now.
Yeah. Oh, I believe the Blind Tiger went out of business here.
Well, I know they moved over on Spring Garden Street, but they might not be open now. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that was just a very interesting time. A very different scene than what it is now. I was talking with David about this, and he said it was just such a great time for music.
I think so.
Oh, David Hurt. I don't know if you knew him. He's our engineer here, but he was around back then, and he was probably listening to a lot of y'all's music.
Like the late 70s?
Yeah.
Early 80s?
Yeah.
I've heard stories about the early 70s, but that was really, before my time on Tate Street. But, there were a lot of just, so many great musicians and cool bands, and there probably still are. I just don't know who they are.
Mm. Yeah. Tell me about Billy Hobbs. Because I heard Ransom Notes, and I guess this was just the fantastic the art of music where I listened to it, and I told this to Bruce that I didn't know Billy, but after listening to that song, I feel like I did.
Good. That's nice. I think I met Billy when I was 18 or 19, and we hung out quite a bit. He was a real character. I mean, he was a musician. Almost like a big brother figure to me in a way, which, and I kind of feel the same way about Bruce, although that happened, that developed more after Billy was murdered, which I think was in 2008.
I remember Billy Hobbs in the early 70s hanging on Tate Street in a black leather motorcycle jacket, jeans, and long curly black hair. We gigged on Tate Street at Elisa's Cafe, roomed together, cooked together. Billy was an excellent cook. Traveled together. We hitched to California and then on another occasion rode in Billy's ambulance home to
But
San
Billy
Diego
was,
to visit a
I'll just
friend.
tell you this one little anecdotal thing. I remember the first time he came over to my parents' house with me. And I remember being a little bit nervous about what my parents might think, because he clearly wasn't, he was a little different than my other friends. And about 20 years, well, about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, my father said to me, whatever happened to Billy Hobbs? And I said, he's doing okay. You know, I saw him a year or two ago, and he was doing fine. And my father said, he was always my favorite. And I just remember thinking, wow, I would have never guessed that, just because, Billy was different. He would.
You feel like he didn't meet the social norms sometimes?
Well, he just, he would, Ransom Notes kind of tells the story. When I met Billy, I think he was hopping trains. Dakota Joe, I know, would do that occasionally. They didn't live, he didn't have a 9-to-5 job. He was an itinerant musician type. But there was a lot more to him than most people, I think, thought. He was very smart and and into a lot of different things. Kind of a Renaissance guy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But Bruce wrote that poem shortly after Billy's death, and when we were recording Still Looking Up at the Stars, we decided to do it. And I think the way it went down, I think the original thing we did was I just improvised behind Bruce while he was, reciting, reading the poem, speaking the poem. And then we added other instruments to it after the fact. It was quite a production. I know I must have spent 35 hours putting parts together, and then we went into the studio and had bass and drums and saxophone, and a friend of mine, John Simonetti, I think, played French horn and tuba and some other horn. We really spent a lot of hours. And then Jason Richmond, the producer of that album and also Soft Soap Purrings, he cleaned up my sloppy attempt at putting it together, and he made it right.
Yeah, sometimes that happens where you put the right people in there, or you put the right people together, and that helps.
Oh, I'll never produce another recording of my own, because the ones that I've had other people work on are better than the ones where I try to do everything.
Oh, were you trying to do everything?
Yeah.
Do you think you're just more suited to like an instrument,
I don't want to be
guitar?
distracted with technical things when I'm trying to be creative.
I got you.
Yeah, because it's even different sides of the brain.
Yeah.
I like to, when I'm playing music, ideally I don't even want to be reading music. Ideally, I want to just be in the zone, as I've heard it said.
Yeah.
And part of that is from a lot of the music that I've been involved in the last 40 years has been jazz.
Yeah.
And a lot of jazz is improvised.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a lot of small group jazz in particular. So, I like, my favorite situations are when the music is kind of loose and you can go off.
Yeah, I could tell it in the way you hearing your albums and the way you play.
And that's the thing about Bruce that's really interesting to me, because Bruce, when I met Bruce, he was a folk singer,
Mm-hmm.
and he is a folk singer.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this other side to Bruce, and I think that we brought it out maybe a little bit more on some of the things that Jason and I, recorded with him, and the other musicians who were on those records. Bruce, he has I know he enjoys jazz. I know he listens to jazz. And Bruce he's an improviser too. You've heard his poems, right?
Mm-hmm.
the poems, like on Still Looking Up at the Stars, we recorded two poems, and I love that stuff. We did Hucksters and For Marvin.
Well, Marv, they tell me you passed on, old man. So I have to think of those days and all those long nights, picking at the wick with Scotty and the boys, and you walking the boards behind the bar and the place really jumping, and Bob squeezed into a booth with 6 people.
And they're both, and actually in particular For Marvin, he's talking about Greensboro. He's talking about people in Greensboro. Marvin was Marvin Craig, I think was his last name, and he was the owner of the Pigwick. He was always behind the bar. And Bruce is referencing people in that.
Chain smoking, talking baseball with plumbers and ballet with schoolgirls from the college. Blue Eyes on the Juke and old Fred singing in the rain with a handful of small change. Hey, Bub, I got enough for us to get a beer. Where did those days go? Where did you go?
So the way that was recorded, we were in the studio. I happened to have, it was a drummer, Bobby Cohen. Let's see, I think it was probably John Simonetti on bass and Dave Finucane on tenor saxophone. And we basically, Bruce started to read the poem, and we just started improvising. And it was one take. And what you hear on the record is what we did. And I remember like listening back to it going, yeah, that's finished. No need to do another one.
Right.
I can't find the funny papers in the news, and there's a Suds and Duds, computers everywhere, and Coleman is tending bar across the street at Logan instead of with you. Because Beeler went off to grad school in Indiana or somewhere, and it's all oral history. And you and I and Dixie and Del Rey are sipping buds on bar stools. Pool bars are cracking, and you're telling me to stay away from the cigarettes, but to go on and drink my beer and have my fun. Harry said you were up on the corner for days before you flew the coop, and you mentioned my dad. I know you loved him, and I'll tell him so when I write, although he wasn't as big as you said he was. But you were pretty big when the Darkling came hunting up Walker Avenue. Remember when I was staying at the Sally? I'd run away to be a picker, and you told me how you'd seen them drugs sneak up on a lot of kids. Well, tonight, I'm just drinking weekend beers, and I'll lift this Guinness to you.
So that's very different from some of the other music that I've played with Bruce, where, you know, they're like, you know, some of the songs are like traditional folk song forms, like something Bob Dylan or Woody Guthrie would do. And I've been asked on more than one occasion, you know, why do you enjoy playing with Bruce so much? You know, there's not very many chords. You know, you're used to playing music that has more chords. And
a lot of variation.
More complicated, and actually there is a lot of variety in Bruce's music.
Mm-hmm.
But I said to the person, have you ever listened to the words? You know, that's why I like playing.
The Don Quixote side of me is stealing once again to the maelstrom of another dream. As she bends the clouds above my head, stir a dying flame.
Playing with him. I started to figure out from all the gigs I did with Bruce, I started paying more and more attention to the lyrics and realizing that, you know, that I wanted to frame the lyric with the proper chord or sound. It's just because the chord might have been G doesn't mean I'm just going to play a grip for G, you know, one of the traditional voicings that guitar players play. I mean, sometimes I might just play an open G chord and it would be perfect, but sometimes it would, to me, it would require something else. So I really like, I like listening to the words and kind of coloring. Does that make sense?
Yeah, filling in the blank.
Yeah,
It's almost like you have a like a sketch drawing, and it's you know, when somebody draws, they usually take a pencil and, you know, maybe draw a sketch of whatever it is of their person or whatever, and it's like the two of you are kind of filling in the background with a little bit here and a little bit there.
And there were even, you know, like when I go back and listen to some of the stuff that we have done, I realize that sometimes I'm kind of playing these little melodic lines behind him while he's singing, and it's almost like I'm a background singer, you know, singing a harmony part. But, you know, it's a mutual friend of Bruce and I think it was Rob Slater, said, he said to me, you know, and I think he said something like, you know, Bruce gives you a lot of room to work. It gives you a lot of space to work. And that's the thing, Bruce was, he's always been very happy to kind of just let me do my thing. And I try to stay out of his way.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, going back to, you know, now that you mentioned that, going back to, I was going to say still looking up at the stars, but the ransom notes on Billy Hobbs, I mean, the music there is like, it's almost its own character, especially when he pauses in between, I guess, the two verses, and there's this
and
long,
like jazz kind of
yeah,
thing. Yeah,
and that's a very, like, I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan, you know, and it's like, I was trying to think of Jungle Land, or, I was trying to think of the other song, but there's this long interlude, and, you know.
So you just reminded me, that whole interlude part in the middle was recorded after all the spoken word stuff was done, and then we put it together. So that came after we had the other parts. That gets pretty intense, as I recall.
Yeah, and it's almost like you're traveling the life of Billy right there. You know, going through, you know, he talks about the portion of Mexico and chasing down the purse snatcher, and it's almost like you're riding the wave of Billy Hobbs. You know?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I remember the first time I heard it, it kind of made me, I felt a lot of emotion, but it made me smile and kind of laugh, because you know, that's the thing about Greensboro. A lot of the people I know in Greensboro are, and I'm one of them too. You know, I know a lot of characters. You know, people use the expression, he's a real character, or he's an original. And it seems like, you know, you'd just be walking down Tate Street and going to the Hong Kong house, and there are all these really interesting characters.
So it's what gives it life, doesn't it? It's what makes it's what makes life interesting.
Yeah.
Because yeah, that's amazing. So tell me about so you've been teaching at you taught Chapel Hill and at East Carolina.
Yeah, you know, I started teaching guitar lessons in the late 1970s at the guitar shop on Tate Street, which was Keith Roscoe's shop, and it was above the Hong Kong House. So it was right in the center of the Tate Street music universe, as I like to think of it. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but you know, I shared whatever I knew. I actually used to take lessons from Scott Mannering, who's a great musician, and for a brief while I got to play in his band called the Sentinel Boys, which was a real big deal to me at the time. And anyway, you know, I've really been teaching private instruction ever since then. But then back around 2010, I was hired by East Carolina University to be the jazz guitar instructor, and I also directed the small group combos for a couple of years. And then about 3 years after I was hired at East Carolina University, University of Chapel Hill hired me to be the jazz guitar instructor there. So I was actually teaching one day, well, I was teaching at both schools, part-time. I was an adjunct. And I lasted about 13 years at ECU and about 9 years at UNC. And then I decided that it was time to move on. I actually left UNC 2 months before the lockdown in 2020. And then I left ECU, I think it was 2 years ago, January.
Mm-hmm.
And but I was already at that point teaching at the Durham Jazz Workshop, which is just an amazing place. In fact, I rent an office space there, a studio space there. So I do all my instructing there. I do teaching for the workshop where I coach jazz combos. You know, the students range in age from like 11 or 12 years old to like 88. I've got one group that I coach on Monday nights. The piano player is 17, and the drummer is 78.
Wow.
There's a saxophone player in a different group that I teach on Thursdays who's 86.
Wow.
And what's interesting is you put the 78-year-old guy and the 17-year-old guy in with the, you know, like the 60-year-old or the 50-year-old or the 45-year-old, and everybody, it's like everybody's the same age. It's awesome.
You know, because like if they're on, I guess, the same playing field of playing.
Yeah, I mean the levels vary somewhat, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just so interesting how the age, it's not really an issue. If you get people who are operating at a similar level, the age is irrelevant. That's one thing I like about jazz. You know, you don't have to look like a pop star to be successful. There's lots of gray-haired guys playing jazz. Don't have to worry about getting your hair colored or low-lighted or highlighted, as
Right.
it were.
Yeah.
But it's a great place, and there's a club connected to it called the Sharp 9 Gallery. And it's become kind of a destination point. Durham Jazz Workshop was actually just named in Downbeat magazine as, you know, we got like an award. I don't know the exact wording, but so we're on the map, and a lot of famous musicians have played in there. I actually played 3 nights with John Abercrombie, who is one of my heroes. John's no longer with us, but that was amazing. We've had Peter Bernstein come through from New York, great guitar player. Bill Stewart, Larry Goldings. I mean, the calendar, if you look at the calendar, it's not just local and regional people. So I'm very happy to be associated with the Durham Jazz Workshop. We're a nonprofit.
What do you enjoy about teaching?
Learning. I can't teach anybody how to play because I can't actually practice for them. But I figured out quite a long time ago that you could actually learn something from a 12-year-old who was just starting to play. That there are things that would come up that were, it was very interesting to me. I had a couple light bulb moments just from trying to explain things or the interaction. You know, I'm a coach. You know, I can share things with people that have worked for me or that have worked for students that I've worked with. But you know, the only person that can really teach me how to play is me. Until they develop the pill, you know, or you know, until I can like call you and go, Brian, take this pill, think about this, and when I wake up tomorrow morning, I'll be able to do it. You know, it doesn't work that way, obviously.
Yeah. There was a story. I listened to Bruce Springsteen's book, and after his saxophonist had died, he was trying to get, and I believe it was his nephew that came in, and anyway, the story goes that he showed up late, and he didn't know like what he was playing or what he was doing, and Bruce like chewed him out, and he said, "You get out of here." He's like, "You come back and you come ready," he said, "because this is hard work."
Yeah.
And he's like, "You are about to step in to like one of the biggest rock bands, to fill in one of the biggest shoes,
Yeah.
and you're not ready, and you showed up late." He said, "Don't ever I can't remember the entire word, but he said like, don't insult what we did or what he did, because he was a great saxophonist."
I think that's more than fair.
Yeah, and but anyway, yeah, I started to learn to play the piano here recently. It's I haven't learned sheet music, but it's tough to try and get both your brain coordinated enough to work and go along with learning what you have to do, and then repeating that until you're tired of the song.
Yeah.
And then playing with the song is just it's very tough things to it, and you just have to spend. I've kept saying I have to spend more time with it, and I think that's what it takes.
Well, if you spend time with it on any kind of regular basis, it doesn't have to be 8 hours a day every day. You will get better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough. Going back, rewinding, as I was thinking about you teaching, how did you start into, when did you first start picking up the instrument, and who taught you and all this stuff?
I mean, I had when I was like 11, maybe 11 or 12. Actually, it might have been 10 or 11. I remember I was given a guitar. I think we were living in Texas, Dallas, and I remember I had a couple guitar lessons with a guy, but I could barely press down the strings. It was a Silvertone acoustic guitar from Sears, and the strings were like high off the fingerboard, and I remember I took a lesson from a guy, and I don't know if it was the first lesson or the second lesson, but he was trying to teach me how to play the chords to that song "Daydream" by the Lovin' Spoonful. Do you remember that? It was kind of a hit around that time, and there was it had an F chord in it, and there's a joke about why they call it the F chord, because it's hard to play, and I remember I took a few lessons, and I told my mom I don't want to do this anymore. So I think I probably stepped away from it for a minute. And then around the same time, my mother took me to the record store. Maybe it was earlier. Maybe it was on my 10th birthday. And she said, "You can buy a record." And I saw the album "Are You Experienced" by Hendrix. And I liked the cover. They were on the cover dressed kind of cool. I'd never seen anything like it. White kid in suburbia, the suburbs of Chicago, and I remember going home, and I had a little phonograph, and putting side one of "Are You Experienced" on this little phonograph, and "Purple Haze" starts up, and I remember thinking, I think this music is going to be really important. And I was right, you know. I mean, nobody. That's before Hendrix became huge. So I think that kind of planted a seed for me. And you know, I realized sometime after that Hendrix was steeped in the blues. And I'm from Chicago, which is arguably the electric blues capital of the world. And so I was already aware of, there was a guitar player named Mike Bloomfield who played with the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. And I remember I was in Chicago visiting my grandparents when I was 18 or 19, and I told my grandfather I was going to go down to the Checkerboard Lounge, which it was Buddy Guy's club. It may still be there, I'm not sure. And I remember him telling me, well, don't, you know, take a cab down there. Don't, you know, like take a bus and have them let you out right in front of the front door because it's not safe. And then before I left, he said, you ever heard of Mike Bloomfield? And I went, yeah, of course. You know, and he said, I know his father. I do business with his father. And I didn't really think anything of it. And then years later, I actually during the lockdown a couple of years ago, I read Guitar King, which was this really great biography of Mike Bloomfield. And there was a thing in there about his father was like a restaurant supplier. He would supply like equipment to restaurants, and my grandfather's business was it was actually called Gilmore Machinery. So I thought, wow, he really did know Mike Bloomfield's father. And then I thought, God, I should have followed up and said, can you get me in touch with Mike Bloomfield? But you know, when you're like in your early, I guess I was probably about 20. You think you're going to live forever, and you got plenty of time.
And you think everybody else is going to live forever
and
too.
Bloomfield didn't live forever. He I think passed away when he was like 38.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
But I got into blues. That's where I'm going with this. And ironically, it was when I was in Maine. I moved to Maine when I was 14 and was there 14, 15, and 16, part of 16. And I met some kids who were into blues. And so I was learning how to play. I had an electric guitar at that point. And I remember I had a reel-to-reel, tape recorder, open reel tape recorder. And I figured out how to plug the turntable into the reel-to-reel, record it fast speed, and then I could slow it down to half speed to slow things down. Now, problem with that is it would also lower everything an octave. So like really low notes it would be hard sometimes to really discern what the pitch was. But I was learning how to play things just by ear, and I'd play along with the records, and I would just play by ear, and I really had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I knew that, E7, A7, and B7 sounded good together. 1, 4, 5. So that was the first chord progression I learned. And then I realized, well, this is used in rock and roll, country, blues. So initially I was kind of a blues/rock guitar player. And then I got interested in jazz just a few years after. My father used to listen to jazz around the house, and he would play Wes Montgomery records. So I grew up listening to Wes Montgomery, and he had some Miles Davis records, and John Coltrane, and Nancy Wilson, Lou Rawls. So I was hearing this music when I was really young, but I didn't really know what it was. And then later I thought, oh man, Wes Montgomery, the thumb, octaves. So I got interested in that, and here we are.
Tell me about playing by ear. Was there any method that you learned, or did you just listen a whole lot and you just kind of came to you?
Well, back in the day, you had to literally pick up the arm of the phonograph and drop the needle back where it was, and just over and over again. I mean, nowadays is much easier because you can just download MP3s, put them into a program like Transcribe or Amazing Slowdowner, and you can slow it down or speed it up as much as you want. And if if the recording is out of tune, and a lot of older recordings are, you can adjust the pitch. So it's much easier now to, I think, if you want to learn to play by ear, and you know nothing about it, you can slow things down very quickly and get them in tune. But that's how I did it, just repetition. What I have my students do is I say, if you can sing it, you can play it. You can learn how to play it. So before you try to find the notes on your instrument, find them with your voice. And even if you don't sing great, if your pitch isn't perfect, you can actually develop better pitch if you try to sing along with things. And once you can actually hum or sing the part, then you can pick up the guitar and you can find it much more readily, or sit down at the piano and find the notes. But when you're trying to go, okay, let me drop the needle, listen to 3 measures of music, and then go right to the instrument, and it was almost impossible at first.
Yeah. And there's just I mean, for me, there'd be so many notes or so many chord progressions in a song. It'd be insane for me to, with a very untrained ear to try and follow that.
Yeah, well, it's true, but like music is like language, and there's different dialects, and as you continue to play piano, you'll probably discover that you'll start to realize, oh, this part of this Bruce Springsteen song, this chord progression is familiar to me because I heard it in this Bob Dylan tune, or I heard it in this Woody Guthrie tune. You know what I mean?
It's in a Taylor Swift too.
Yeah, exactly
and
right.
It's funny because as I was learning the 2 different artists, she references him.
Springsteen.
So it's like she was listening to him too. She listened
Sure.
to everybody,
Well, everybody listens.
Everybody
to
listens to
Springsteen,
everybody.
right?
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of fascinating.
But that's the cool thing about music is, when you listen to a specific genre, you realize that there are like patterns, recurring themes, and there are in language too. The way we talk to each other. So I actually think if you're not trying to be like a classical musician from day one, I think maybe there's an advantage to learning completely by ear initially. In fact, aren't there programs, is it the Suzuki method, or where they get kids who are really young and they're playing like half-size violins, and the first thing they learn is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I don't know if that's a Suzuki method or something else, and I remember the first time I walked into a classroom and heard these little kids, I'm talking about 4 or 5-year-olds, and they're all playing it by ear, in tune. And I kind of went, wow. I kind of wish I had had that experience when I was a little kid. Mm-hmm. They're not telling you, okay, these notes are in a major scale, key of C. The intervals between the first and second note is a whole step. I mean, think about how we learn to speak when we're babies. We learn by just mimicking what we're hearing, right? There's not somebody standing over us talking about nouns and verbs and adjectives.
Yeah.
It's all by ear. I remember I was at the American Dance Festival years ago, 20 years ago, and I was walking outside and I heard these African drummers, and there was 10 or 15 people. It was a Duke University outside on the quad, and they were playing, and I just remember thinking, man, what rhythm is that? I was sitting there trying to count it, and I had no idea what they were doing, and they stopped. And I remember I walked over to one of them, and I said, what rhythm, or what time signature are you playing in? And he said, I don't speak English. But the other guy spoke, and he said, no, no, time signature. I said, well, how do you count it? How are you counting it? And he said, no counting. And I said, what? And then he played part of it. And then he played the next part. And then he played the next part. And he looked at me. And then he repeated it. And then he repeated it. And I went, okay, I get it. Wow. Yeah. And
So
it
it's like
makes
there was a
sense.
count, but it was just like all up here.
That's not how he was thinking about it.
Right.
You know, it's like if we thought about grammar, proper usage of grammar every time before we spoke. I mean, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be able to say anything to anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's it's, and I guess in a smaller sense, it's like texting too. You know, quick texting. We don't use proper
No.
anything, and I guess we text like we speak. You know, it's not like we're writing a formal
The
paper
problem
to
is
turn in.
my phone does this autocorrect thing, and sometimes
Oh, it
I
throws you.
send it before I see what it did.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you know, scratch that.
Yeah, and you know, in the same way, I think about this as you were talking. You know, I thought about learning how to do this right here. You know, just being on camera and interviewing, and so I watched. You know, anybody I could watch. You know, 60 Minutes, Barbara Walters. You know, anybody, and you know, everybody has their own. Well, everybody's on a different format too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I guess it just depends on the medium or whatever that you're on. But I kind of watched everybody, you know, do what they do, and pick up their language.
It's a good way to learn. Mimic what you like.
Yeah.
You know, find things you like and learn from it.
Yeah. But anyway, I wanted to, you know, finish the last part of this off by, you know, talking about Bruce. And were you at the Flatiron concert that was put on?
I was, yeah, and I
didn't get a chance. I got a chance to watch the first part with Christy Jackson.
Yeah.
But,
well, God, it was amazing, and I'm glad that he got to see it. It was almost, for me, it was almost overwhelming because I ran into some people there that I haven't seen in a long time. Like John Reese was there, and I remember going to hear him play at Elisa's Cafe underneath the Hong Kong House when I was 17 or 18. And I hadn't seen or heard him in years. And the other thing that was kind of overwhelming was several people asked me if I would play with them on the spot. Like I knew I was going to play some tunes with Buddy Rowe, Mark Harrison. He contacted me and I said, "Man, I'd love to play some tunes with you." And I knew that I was going to play a solo guitar rendition of one of Bruce's songs, Notes from Knoxville. And then I did an instrumental version of Lost Boy off Soft So Purrings with Martha Bassett and Pat Lawrence and Sandy Blocker played on it. And then Sandy came up to me and said, "Hey man, you know, I think the night before or 2 days before he sent me a thing and said, would you play with me? It was percussion and guitar." And he sang too. And I said, "Sure." And then David Childers came up to me and said, "You know, what key do you," he said, "You and Bruce do Riding the Stream in C, right?" And I said, "I think so." I haven't played it in a couple of years. And he said, "Well, I sure would like you to play that with me." And I said, "I'd be flattered." Mm-hmm. David Childers is a great singer-songwriter. And then, you know, we got done and he asked me to stay up and finish out with him. Mm-hmm. I got to play with Sam Frazier, who has known Bruce as long as I have. Maybe he met Bruce a little bit before I did. I mean, I met Sam when I was 18 or 19 years old. So it was kind of a walk down memory lane in a way, and then also collaborating with people that I don't normally play music with. Mm-hmm. And of course, not knowing what they're going to do, not knowing the songs in some cases, but you know, I'm fairly comfortable dealing with things on short notice or just improvising. And so it was really inspiring just to be a part of it. And it was really cool to see all the love for Bruce, you know, and see all the people who he has inspired for all these years. I mean, Bruce. I was thinking about it. I met him probably in 1977 or 8, but I don't recall if we even played a gig. I know we rehearsed one time, but then I think maybe I left or he went out of town to do a visiting artist thing. Something happened. And then I was on the radio at WQFS, I think in 2007, talking about my new record at the time, and he called in. I think it was Chris Rulock was maybe the DJ, and she put him on speaker in between the interview, and I think I had played a jazz standard or something, and he said, "Man, it's great to hear you play. Let's play together sometime." I think that's what the conversation was. And then a year or two later, I got a phone call after Billy's death from a guy that owns a coffee shop, and I apologize for not remembering his name right now. And he said, there's going to be a performance at the city park in Greensboro, and Billy's mother and some of his siblings are going to be there. Would you play some tunes with Bruce Piaf? And I remember saying, man, I haven't seen Bruce Piaf in probably 20 years, and I don't. And if we've played together, it's been even longer than that. You're going to have to call him and ask him. And he said, well, he told me to call you. And I said, well, in that case, I'm in. And we worked ever since then. We worked a lot right up until COVID kind of shut everything down.
Yeah.
There was a period where, in the aftermath of Billy's death, where I think I was talking to Bruce at least 5 days a week on the phone, sometimes for an hour a pop, for over a year. And that's when we became really, really close friends. He really is as close a friend as anybody that I know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's really told the story of Greensboro.
I'll say. I mean, I go back and listen to the early records, the ones that I had nothing to do with, and there's so much stuff. I can't remember all the tunes, but I'll be in the car and I'll hear this. And I'll go, wait a minute, I think I know that guy. Or I kind of remember that. It's really amazing. He's really kind of documented.
Hamburger Square.
Oh yeah.
Computer universe is seizing the day. Don't analyze and explain it away. A little primitive dance and song. Come on down now, come on along. Down on Hamburger Square, Hamburger Square. Some of my favorite people down there. Down on Hamburger Square, Hamburger Square. Sam and Max and Little Esther's down there. No love on a leash, razors between the teeth.
And he had 23 songs on those, I think his early album had about 23 songs on it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
I think there's like 25 albums maybe?
Yeah, something like that. There's a lot of them.
That's incredible, man. I mean,
yeah.
There's major artists that don't,
right.
People that are famous that don't put out, who aren't that prolific. Yeah, it's impressive. I think it's impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, he and it was out there. It's out there on the Flatiron. So he's been battling cancer for 20 years, and I had no idea. I interviewed him 8 years ago, and so at the time I had no idea what period of the
Did he mention that he had it 8
He
years
didn't.
ago?
He never mentioned it to me. He kind of, I guess, was battling it quietly.
Well, I think it's okay for me to say this. If I'm not mistaken, I was talking to Laura recently, and I hope I get this right. He was given 5 years as a prognosis 20 years ago, and clearly he went past that,
Yeah.
you know. And I didn't know. I'm not even sure that I knew 10 years ago that he was battling cancer. There was a point where he did tell me, and it was more than a few years ago. But I never really thought about it because it wasn't. It didn't seem to be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think. I think I can say this too. Now he can't walk. He doesn't have any feeling in his legs.
Yeah.
So it's a tough spot. He's in a tough spot.
Yeah. I went to visit him the other day, and man, he was singing. I mean, he can't, he's on a short period of talking at the moment, but and man, he was singing like I can't remember what something would come up and he'd be like, "Recipe for Brunswick stew," something like
Wits
that.
Grill.
Yeah,
Yeah, one of my favorites.
Yeah, he just throws something out there. He just started, here and there, and I just thought that was incredible. What a character, what a treasure.
I agree.
Yeah.
There's, he's going to leave behind quite a legacy.
Yeah, he really has. I'm glad to have been a part of his interview and interviewed him and.
Is there somewhere online I could listen to that?
Yeah, you corrected something on there because I think YouTube might have thrown something out and you said it's blank. I think you wrote on. You gave me a comment on that. I was like,
really?
Oh, yeah.
I have to go back.
And
look
so
at my YouTube
when I
page.
re-aired it, when I found out what was going on, we re-aired the interview, and so I remember looking at that comment. I was like, oh, I have to go back and fill that in because it was so old. I had to grab it from YouTube. So there's a gap in there where there's like no music at all. And, it was his music, but YouTube like kicked it out because it was like, yeah, no. So, I had to go in and refill that in, find out what song was even in there.
Well, there's going to be more music coming out. Claire Holly is spearheading a recording that's going to be like a tribute to Bruce and his music. And I don't know the details of it, but Claire worked with Bruce before I did. She did a lot of work with Bruce. Sam Frazier, Martha Bess. I mean, there's so many musicians around here that have worked with Bruce. And so I imagine that some of those people are going to be on this recording. And I actually am going to do an album of Bruce's material. Now, I can't tell you how quickly I can make that happen, but I'd like to think I can make it happen before the end of 2025. And I was actually talking to Jason Richmond earlier because I was at a pre-production session for another recording that someone's doing. And we were talking about it. And initially I had said, I was thinking I was going to do like a solo guitar record of Bruce's tunes instrumentally, but Jason said, look, man, I'm paraphrasing. I think it would be cool for you to do some instrumental stuff, and then maybe half the record we have guest singers with just you and bass and drums, because Jason likes the way that I operate in that setting. So we'll at some point start thinking about tunes and who the singers might be. And I like that idea, actually. That actually isn't quite as... that seems like it might be easier to do than a whole album of instrumental. Plus, how do you get across... I felt funny even playing Notes from Knoxville instrumentally because the words are so great. It's such a great story. But people seem to like it.
Yeah. Notes from Knoxville, is that the one where he goes to the bar? If I remember correctly.
I'm not sure. Is there a lyric you're thinking about?
Huh?
Is there a particular lyric?
Hold on. Maybe we can... Great thing is I can always edit.
Yeah, exactly right.
I have this one.
That's it.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah.
And I've listened to this album. He gave me the albums, and you know, I just play them in my car as I'm driving through Greensboro. And,
I love this record. I wish that we had had a little bit more time and money to spend more time mixing it. We kind of ran out of time.
oh, this isn't what I was thinking. I was thinking of a different song. I'm sorry.
But this is a great
Yeah.
song.
What do you felt like was rushed?
Just some of the mixes, I think we could have been a little more polished.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, none of it is. It's all within acceptable parameters. It's just Jason and I have high standards.
I understand.
If you listen to Soft Soap Purrings, maybe it's a little more polished overall.
Yeah.
Because we made sure that we had the time and the means to do it. Now there are only 12 songs, I think, or 11 or 12 songs on Soft Soap Purrings. I think there's like 18 songs on here, and we recorded it in just 2 or 3 days, I think.
Wow.
I mean, there were some late nights.
Yeah, I can understand that.
I mean, I was in the studio, I think, 2 of the days for 16 hours. I don't do that anymore. I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But this album, Still Looking Up the Stars, has got a lot of heart.
Yeah. Oh, I love these albums, and the album cover even.
David, his son, did it. Awesome.
Oh, he did the shirt too.
He did the shirt. I said to you when I came in, oh yeah, I was wearing that shirt a couple days ago.
They gave me the shirt, and I said, you know what, when I interview him, I'm gonna have this shirt on. So it was you know, rightfully so, because I wanted to have you on for years now, and since I've interviewed Bruce and I've heard y'all's music together, and so you know, it's interesting that.
Well, thank you for inviting me and making the time.
Oh yeah.
For being interested.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. I love your music. I love your collaborations. I've enjoyed listening to all your jazz albums.
Yeah, I've actually put out 2 records in the last 2 years, which
Yeah.
is amazing because there were only 5 in the previous 35 or 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I put out a record out in 2000. It was recorded in 2021, and it came out about 10 months later, and it's a trio record with Oteil Burbridge on bass and Scott Amendola on drums.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty freewheeling record. It's not a straight-ahead jazz record. The previous record, Night Visions, was like a modern jazz quartet record with Dave Finucane on saxophone and Ron Brendel on bass and Kobe Watkins on drums, and all original music. On the record with Oteil and Amendola, there were some originals, but then I did a Ron Brendel tune.
Mm-hmm.
I did Stella Blue by Jerry Garcia and Robert Hunter, and I did The Crystal Ship by the Doors. It's kind of a psychedelic, all kinds of overdubs and stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Turned Jason Richmond loose with the production on that.
Oh my God.
And then I put a record out. It came out in December, a duo record with a friend of mine who's a great jazz piano player and writer who grew up in Greensboro. We met in high school. A lot of people that I will probably remember Keith Waters, wonderful musician, and he got in touch with me a couple of years ago and asked if I'd be interested in doing a duo album. And I said, yeah. And that record is more I can say that Keith and I have both been influenced by the great, Jim Hall on guitar and Bill Evans on piano. So, I mean, we sound like we sound, but we certainly we're reaching for something along those lines.
Yeah.
That's very different from the previous one, which is very different from the previous one, and I just like different music. And when I was younger, I got messages from people in the music industry that were kind of discouraging. Like I remember talking to a guy at Atlantic Records. He called me. He heard one of my records and said, "Are you interested in a record deal?" And I said, "Maybe." And I could hear he was listening to the record In the Stream, the first song, Left on Coltrane, and he was going, "Man, this is swinging, man. Are you you interested? And I said, well, yeah, but how much of this album have you listened to? And he went, I just put it on. And I said, why don't you fast forward and listen to the first 20 or 30 seconds of the first 4 songs? He went, okay, and he did. And he got back on the phone and went, yeah, man, you're into a lot of different stuff. Figure out, what you want to focus on, and then we'll talk again. And I said, okay, thank you. And I thought, why should I have to do that? Of course, 2 or 3 years later, all these guitar players started doing all this different stuff. Like some of my heroes are guys like John Scofield, Bill Frisell, and they do all kinds of music. Abercrombie did, Pat Metheny does. They don't make the same record over and over again. They collaborate with all these different artists. And so I kind of, it was never really a goal to get a record deal. I've played on a bunch of records, and I've gotten to play with a lot of great people, and I've gotten to do whatever I want to do. And how many stories have we heard about people who sign a record deal and are miserable because they have to do this or this or this?
Oh yeah, now they're beholden to a certain type, or they got to meet a certain standard that's not even their own.
And I had friends who ended up owing the label like $200,000.
Oh, because they signed a junky contract.
Well, they signed the deal, but I guess maybe they didn't realize that all those limos and all those meals and all the instruments and stuff, that was actually going to come out of record sales.
Oh, yeah.
And if it didn't come out of record sales, it was going to come out of their pocket. So
I think I was listening to the guy that wrote 50 Cent's biography, and he said, I thought the streets were dirty. He said, then I went up into the music industry, and those guys are the real crooks. He said, those guys are even slimier than the dudes. Like, I thought I knew a thing or two, about, how to deal in the streets, and then I moved up, and he said it was even dirtier, what you get into.
There's a book called Confessions of a Record Producer. I think that's the title, and it's, the author uses a pseudonym, because I think he's a well-known producer, but the pseudonym is Moses Avalon. Mm. And I didn't even finish the book. I got about halfway through it, and it was so depressing to me. I just thought, okay, yeah, I'm just going to do what I do and not worry about, I have to get a record deal. Yeah. I started thinking, why do I have to get a record deal? Nowadays you can, if you have a computer, mm-hmm. and you can at least record your ideas, and then if you have a friend who's really good with recording, you can. I've heard people have made records like in their home that sound pretty good. Mm. I think Alanis Morissette's first record, I think part of that was recorded in a guy's basement or something, and it became she had a huge hit.
Yeah. And she's a lyrical genius too.
Yeah. I mean, and so do we? I mean, there's a point where, as long as it meets a certain standard, speaking for myself, it doesn't matter to me if it was recorded in somebody's basement or at Electric Ladyland Studios. If it's good, it's good.
Yeah. That's what I've enjoyed about being here and and doing this. This is I don't know, some affiliate TV station might look down on me or whatever, but I mean, I just have there's so much freedom to do what you want and not trying to think of the right wording here. I don't want to say sell out. I don't think that's the right word, because I think there's a different you're beholden to different things in a commercial setting, but I've just enjoyed being here.
Man, you're lucky then. And I enjoy like where I am right now.
Yeah.
Working and teaching at the Durham Jazz Workshop, and performing. I'm performing a lot more now than I was even a year before the pandemic, because there was a period where I kind of backed off because there was nowhere to really play jazz except restaurants and bars, and so I actually took a break at one point and didn't play a lot of jazz. And then when I discovered the Sharp 9 Gallery Durham Jazz Workshop, I remember the first time I went in, I didn't really prepare, like a show. I kind of went in and 30 minutes before we started, we just decided what tunes we wanted to play.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized, wow, people, I think at the time it was $20, a ticket. Now it's like 30 or more. And I realized, I need to, like, the next time I play here, maybe write some original music or, write some arrangements, like put together a show that's not the same thing that people would hear if they heard me sitting in at a restaurant or at a bar. Now, I still do the occasional restaurant or bar gig, but I don't do it as a band leader because they don't pay enough. They pay the same as they did 30 years ago, literally. 30 years ago, I was making $100 or $125 a night playing in restaurants and bars, and there are musicians right now in Raleigh that are sometimes playing for less or the same. Now they're young, in most cases, and I was willing to play for whatever I could get initially, but I will go in as a sideman, meaning my name isn't advertised. If it's somebody I like to play with, occasionally, and just to get to make music. As much as I was worried about money during the lockdown, there was a point where I realized, man, I am like starving creatively, and it's affecting my mood, because I had been so used to collaborating with all these cool people, musicians, dancers, poets, and then all of a sudden, you're not playing with anybody. You're on Zoom. I hope to never go through that again.
Yeah. I interviewed Christy Jackson on Zoom because I think we were in the middle of everything, and it's not the same as
it has. It's never. Well, I don't know. Maybe it'll be the same one day. I don't think it'll be the same. It may not be the same in my lifetime. I don't know. But I can tell you, I'm enjoying playing music now as much as I ever have. I mean, I get kind of whipped up, when
do you think that's because of like the drought, you might say, of COVID, or is it just because?
I've always, the only time I started to not have a good time was when most of what I was doing was just playing in these bars and restaurants, and I was having issues with my hand. And it was just grueling. I was, it was like a job. It was like going to a job. And now when I have a performance, if I say yes, I'll do the gig, then basically I'm going to have a great time. Because if that's not possible, I'm not going to do the gig.
Yeah. And
sometimes the gigs pay a lot of money, and sometimes they don't pay much at all. But if I take it, I'm going to have fun.
Yeah.
And it's fun to make music with people that you have a history with. The best music I've been involved in, by and large, has not been with the most famous or the most amazing, musicians. Mm-hmm. It's been with people who I like, who play on a very high level, sometimes world-class level, I think. And there's something about getting to play music with people that you have a history with, that usually elevates the music. And I'm really proud of a lot of the music, most of the music I've done with Bruce. I mean, we were talking the other day, and I said, man, your music has inspired me as much as any music that I've been involved in my life. And somebody that knows me as a jazz guitar player might go, what? But again, listen to the words.
Now, have you ever gotten like nervous or anything before you went up there?
Yeah.
Do you still get nervous?
I don't know sometimes.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
There's a little bit of, I kind of feel like right before the gig, if there's not a little bit of this like anticipation or nervous energy, maybe it's time to stop. I don't know.
Well, I was hearing, I heard this said before, that like fighters before a fight, if they're not nervous, they won't fight because they don't have that preparation in them.
Yeah.
Like they don't have that nervous angst that's making them, that fight or flight ain't there. And if if you're not getting in the octagon or the boxing ring with that fight or flight there, you're not going to have that same edge that you would, if you're too relaxed, or because the other guy on the other side, if he thinks of you as, someone like, I really got to prepare for this guy, and you're too relaxed thinking this, you don't have that edge, and he might get the better of you.
Oh, sure. But I don't get nervous to the point where it is like a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Where I feel like I'm going to have a anxiety attack or something.
Right.
But there were some times when I was younger that that things happened, and I did. And probably not very many people even realized it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the people I was playing with did. But I've been doing it a long time. I've been playing professionally for 45 years.
Yeah.
And most of the 45 years I've been just doing music. Odd jobs here or there. I haven't, there was a period where I was doing some driving for Uber and Lyft before the pandemic for about a year and a half. And I kind of got into it and was doing it really more than I wasn't doing it full time, a couple of days a week for a couple hours a day. Sometimes a lot of hours a day if I had a day off. But I kind of had this romantic notion of, jazz musicians in New York City, a lot of them have to drive cabs, but that wore off pretty quickly when you looked at the reality of how much you were making doing it, and
you don't make much in Uber or Lyft.
I mean, there were a few days where I made really good money, but most of the time I probably lost money when you start to figure in wear and tear on the car and gas.
Yeah.
It was interesting. But for most of the last 45 years, I've been a full-time musician who did a mix of things, from teaching lessons, playing commercial gigs, GB, general business, like weddings, corporate events, and then the creative gigs, where you get to play. So I've been pretty fortunate. I don't know that retirement is in my future, but I don't really want to retire. I don't want to stop playing. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
Some people I think about, well, now I can retire and sit in a rocking chair on the porch, but I think it's important to keep moving.
Yeah, and that's the idea. I mean, I think getting up every day and doing something is, having a purpose, having a goal, having something that you're going after is a good thing, because that's what gives you life.
Yeah, and like Bruce, I've been fortunate to be married to somebody who never has given me a hard time about being a musician. And my wife happens to be she was a professional ballerina, and she teaches and choreographs, so she's an artist also. She's also a singer, songwriter, and I recorded a couple of records with her in 1999, 2000. So I think it helps when your spouse actually understands what you do.
Yeah.
And even though they may not like you to be away, they're pushing you out the door when there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's another thing I admire about Bruce. I know a lot of musicians, I'm not going to mention names, but who get to a certain point and they decide they're going to leave their family behind, And I mean, I think Bruce is he's been a great family man all these years. So I admire him for that, as well as his writing and his music.
Yeah, and of course, it's not an easy life being a musician. Trying to chase, trying to hustle, trying to get gigs, and teaching gigs, like you said. So that's good. You've had a good support system. And
Yeah.
it's either going to make you stronger or make you, break you apart.
Yeah. And anybody that's done any amount of touring, and I haven't toured nearly as much as a lot of people I know, but I have done some here and abroad. And I figured out pretty quickly that it wasn't a party. I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to like Europe, or I'm going on a 5-week world tour, and it's going to be just a big party. And a couple weeks into it, you realize, oh, this is like hard. And there was even a point where I couldn't wait to go home. I remember sitting in a 55-floor hotel room in Hong Kong, overlooking the Hong Kong Bay. It was an amazing view, and thinking, I can't wait to get back to my dusty loft apartment in downtown Durham, across the street from the Durham Bulls Athletic Park. I can't wait to sleep in my own bed, as opposed to this $800 a night room.
Wow.
So, being a musician can be, the arts are tough. I mean, some people make a whole lot of money doing it, and then others, not so much, and then others end up penniless at the end. And fortunately, that won't be me. I'm going to make it to the end, and I feel fortunate.
Was it just being homesick that you just
being tired of the road, and I haven't even been on the road like nearly as much as a lot of the people that I look up to and admire.
Yeah.
I mean, I know musicians that are on the road 150 nights a year, 180 nights a year. I don't think I would really enjoy that unless all the music I was involved with was like super high level. And even then, I don't know how long I could have done that.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't go out now for more than 2 weeks unless the money was really, really great.
Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of big time artists right now. Like I think Miley Cyrus said she's done touring, and I said, well,
she's done. She said.
Yeah, I think she said for now, or I mean, it might be forever, but I'm sure for the next foreseeable future. She just said, I think it was like last August. She said, I'm just done touring. Like, I mean, she's been at it since she was like what, 12 or 13 years old.
Yeah.
And now
Have you flown much in the last 3 or 4 years?
A little bit. I went a couple different places.
I mean, do you remember like how it changed after 9/11?
I didn't fly ever before. I was 12 years old when 9/11. Yeah, and I didn't really leave New Jersey much since then.
It became, I mean, flying is such a pain in the ass now compared to prior to.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
It used to be so easy, and things are different.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you talked about, so you've been to Europe, you've been to Central America, you've been all
Asia,
Middle
East.
Wow.
Brazil.
Yeah.
I guess that's South America. Where else? Canada.
Is there any place you really want to go back to or visit or?
A lot of places. It's funny. I think about Berlin. Berlin was kind of this dark.
What year did you go to Berlin?
I was there right before the wall came down, and then again after.
Wow.
And the best Chinese restaurant I ever went to was in Berlin. For some reason, that just sticks out.
That's
the best Chinese food
That's
I've ever
really
had.
interesting.
And I remember being struck by our waiter. We got there like it was after midnight. It was after a show.
Yeah.
I was on tour with Nina Freelon the second time, and I remember we got there late, and the place was packed. And I remember hearing our waiter speak in at least 4 different languages fluently, depending on which table he was at. something I wish I could do. But the food was amazing, and just the energy. It kind of reminded me of New York, you know, but you know, maybe a little darker.
Yeah. Was it? I mean, can you describe the difference? You said you were there before and after the Berlin Wall fell. Was there any difference that you noticed?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed just not as tense.
Yeah.
I remember going to I think they call it the East Side Gallery. I took a bunch of photos actually of the wall, and then I went and took photos of it later. And it was interesting because there was a lot of graffiti, and the parts of the wall had been like knocked down. And you know, I didn't spend enough time there to really see much. The first time I was there was in 1992, and it was the Philip Morris Super Band tour, and I was there because I was working with Nina. And I remember one night, me and 3 or 4 of the guys in the crew went to a bar down the street from the Intercontinental Hotel, and we were in there till like 6 in the morning. And at one point, the owner came in, and he was wearing a kilt. And one of the guys that was in the road crew was from Scotland, and he just got such a kick out of this German guy wearing a kilt.
Yeah.
And it was a fun night. First time I ever enjoyed drinking beer.
Really?
Was in Berlin that night, because I had never had that kind of beer before.
Yeah.
This is before all these microbreweries, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, if I could get this kind of beer in the United States, I might drink beer more. Yeah, that was fun. You know, I remember Budapest was interesting to me. I have family, you know, ancestors from there that I never met. Goes back a long ways, but I don't know how much fun it would be to go there now. You know, I'd like to go back to Paris. I'd like to go back to Italy. But you know, when you're on a tour like that, 5 weeks, 13 or 14 countries, you're typically you might be in a place one night, or you might be in a country for 3 or 4 days. I spent a week in Brazil, 4 days in Sao Paulo, 3 days in Rio, and I would like to go back there. You know, to play music. The level of musicianship there was so high. But I think music is appreciated more in some ways. I mean, I know the kids in the public schools, at least back then, were like, you had to take music classes. You know, it wasn't like an elective, and it wasn't like, well, we don't have enough money to.
Oh, you mean you're talking about in America? Yeah.
Yeah, in Brazil it was like.
Oh, it's part of the language.
It's part of the culture. I mean,
yeah.
I remember.
It's like in the streets and everything.
It's in the streets. I remember seeing little kids like singing and dancing and playing these little hand drums, and I'm thinking, kind of like when I saw those African drummers, my God, you know, what are they playing?
Yeah.
And to them it was like normal.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, we don't really have, other than buskers.
Yeah.
Which in Greensboro is kind of rare. We have a few of those. Maybe on a first Friday you might catch a couple, but.
Do we need to say anything else to wrap it up?
I think that's about it, man. Thank you for being on.
Oh, man.
I'm sorry for keeping you.
No, it's okay. I mean, I enjoyed the conversation.